Good morning, good afternoon, everybody. This is Nick Shillon. Thanks so much for joining this next episode of In the Nick of Time. We're going to get started in about 7-8 minutes now. We're going to have a great time talking about quantum and the cyber threats and what to do to make sure we can protect ourselves against this next threat. So stay tuned. We're going to get started in about 8 minutes. Good morning, good afternoon, everybody. Thanks so much for joining this next episode of In the Nick of Time. We're going to get started in about 7 minutes. In the meantime, if you want to share your here, please put your name in the comment section below so we can highlight you on the screen. Also, if you want to ask a questions to Duncan about quantum, make sure you start the question with a Q. We have a lot of questions already for the show, but you never know. If you have a great idea or a great question, make sure you start posting it into the comment section below. Finally, wanted to remind everybody to register for the show in the nickofTime.tv. And of course, if you have not yet tried the learning platform we launched about 2 months ago, learnwithnick.com, give it a shot. You have a 10-day free trial there to see what you think. We're going to make an announcement today to get some of your feedback and see if you have interest helping us in the new piece of this puzzle when it comes to learning and creating a community around the cloud native and DevSecOps and digital transformation. So stay tuned for the announcement at 1 p.m. More, in 5 minutes, we're going to get started. Good morning, good afternoon, everybody. Thanks so much for joining again. This next episode of In the Nick of Time. We're gonna have a great time today with Duncan talking about quantum. It's a pretty unique topic. We have not covered it yet on the show, so it's going to be a lot of deep dive and understanding of the technical piece, but also looking at the cyber aspect of this and the threats and how we're doing against those threats, and more importantly, how are we doing against China. So it's going to be a very interesting discussion. Thanks, as always, for joining us. When you have questions, make sure you start with a Q so we know it's a question. We get a lot of messages from Twitter, LinkedIn, YouTube, and Facebook. So start with a Q. And if you want to share you here today, do that. I want to thank again everybody for joining us. So many recurring people joining us every week on Tuesdays to talk about tech. So it's always exciting to have you. We have a lineup for the next 2 months, ready actually up to end of December, with a lot of great guests. You're going to be pretty impressed who is going to come on the show in the next few weeks. Next week, actually, is going to be the team behind TAK, TAK, from the DoD, which is an amazing innovation team that has built solutions on Android used by 250,000 people. So it's going to be a very interesting deep dive on what they've been building for many years, and really embracing the concept around DevSecOps. Also wanted to remind everybody to subscribe to the show. Of course, if you've not done that, please go to inthenickofTime.tv and register so you can get an email a week to tell you about the next episode and the next videos we're going to publish. This week, we just released a video on the break glass accounts. What are they? How to use them? How to protect yourself by making sure that you're securing those accounts correctly. That was kind of the main reason behind the breach of Uber. So if you missed also the Uber breach, we've done a video on the Uber breach, doing a deep dive on that and what happened during that breach. So check it out. It was a lot of lessons learned, and I think we did a pretty good job at showing kind of all the step-by-step pieces of the lateral movement. And so that's so important to make sure you mitigate and reduce that attack surface, and reduce the ability of malicious actors to laterally move to your crown jewel. So check out that video if you've not done that. They're on the learnwithnick.com, and it's completely open to the public as well. If you're not registered and you want to give it a shot, we have 20% off for early adopters, still up to 2,000 people. We have a 50% off for military, civilian, and veterans. Don't forget veterans get 50% off as well. I wanted to also announce today we're gonna launch something pretty cool. I wanted to get your feedback and love to get your participation in the next metaverse we're gonna launch with Gather Town. If you've not checked Gather Town, you can go check gather.town, the website, and you're gonna see this kind of 2D virtual world with kind of a Zelda style looking back in the day of the gaming days. So if you have not checked that out, go check out Gather. And so we're going to launch a cloud native town. And so we're creating in partnership with CNCF, Linux Foundation, and many other companies. We're gonna have not only all of the Learn with Nick content there for you to be able to navigate. We're gonna have keynotes, spaces, kind of office space to be able to do one-on-one conversations. We're going to have room about different topics, from acquisition to cyber to Kubernetes to automation, SRE, GitOps. And so a lot of great dedicated rooms to go and have a chat. It's all virtual, but more importantly, you're going to be able to interact, chat, engage with the community. We have so many subscribers now on Learn with Nick. So you're going to be able to engage with different companies, from telcos to healthcare to banking to retail. And so you're going to be able to go live and not only check the content we have, but also interact with the teams from all these Fortune 500, 7 nations, kind of struggling with the same problems, air gap Kubernetes, edge deployments, all these different things. So you're going to be able to really have a real-time discussion. And so I'm going to be there too. We're going to be able to chat. We're going to be able to engage. It's going to be kind of a space-looking world. We're going to have every company from CNCF being able to post their releases, what are they working on every 2 weeks to every month, to tell the community what they're doing in terms of next releases, features, and so on, schedules, new releases of Kubernetes. We're gonna have live events, so it's gonna be pretty fun. So when we announced probably in a month, we're gonna launch the world, and you're gonna have a link on LinkedIn. You're gonna be able to click that link and to create an account, and for free, no cost whatsoever, you're gonna be able to go and enter the metaverse. And it's gonna be the cloud native metaverse. So I'd love to get your feedback. What kind of content should we put? What companies do you think should be on there? We have a lot of CNCF related companies. We're gonna have all the Learn with Nick content, all the in the nick of time content videos. So you can watch that. You're gonna have live games. So you can go play with people. So I'd love to get your feedback on what else we could be doing. But I think it's gonna be a pretty fun and engaging community, and you're gonna be able to learn and do that fast and fail fast and learn fast, but don't fail twice for the same reason. So I don't know if you tried Gather before, but we're gonna Defense Unicorns, a lot of different companies, Vivsoft and Raft are gonna join us to kind of bring the content there, have an ambassador. So if you're interested in kind of being a content moderator and kind of ambassador on the platform and be able to guide people throughout the world, it's going to be pretty big, so people are going to get confused. If you want to be kind of a special access there, reach out to us on LinkedIn and we can give you access and you can play with the stuff. So, all right. So that was a big announcement. We're going to go back to what really matters here. Our guest, Duncan Jones. And before I bring him on the screen, as always, I'm going to be able to give you a very quick rundown of his deep expertise. And really, he is the head of cybersecurity at Quantinuum, and he has 15 years experience developing security solutions for global companies with projects that range from securing the backbone of the internet to maintaining national ID systems. So pretty broad set of skills. He had senior roles in large technology companies and led teams in many different sectors, including, of course, innovation, research, and product management. Worked in a very large set of industries from hardware security to IoT, and he's in his current role, he's overseeing the cyber activities, including the development and commercialization of the Quantum Origin platform, which really is what led me to reach out to the team, as they are able to generate the strongest cyber crypto keys in the world, according to them. So we're going to find out what that means, how this works, and what are the buzzwords versus real truth to that. But I'm very excited to learn more using quantum computers, of course. He's a speaker, commentator on cyber topics at events, and a member of the World Economic Forum Quantum Cybersecurity Initiative. And of course, you can find him on LinkedIn. So let's bring Duncan on now. Welcome.
Hi there, Nick. It's great to be here.
Yeah, I was so excited. Your expertise is very deep in a topic that, quite honestly, I barely can scratch the surface off. So it's a first for me, where I'm at least able to understand the basics of life of a topic. But I can tell you, in this case, you're gonna have to educate not only me, but probably a lot of the audience. So that's why we're so excited to have you. It's the first time we really get to talk about quantum. And quite honestly, there is a lot of activity and noise and discussions between NIST and what just happened with some of the algorithm that got certified and then one got hacked and whatnot. So it's going to be a very interesting discussion. But before we get started, always we tell people to tell us a little bit about your journey. So over to you for that.
Sure. I noticed actually a question in the chat which was related to how does one get into a role like the one that I'm in, and we can maybe tackle that in more detail later, but I'm going to paint a quick picture of a journey that is suitably random and by chance and not particularly well structured, that somehow brought me to where I am today. My background is technical, so you can tell from my accent that I come from a country not too far away from the country you were raised in, Nick. And I grew up in Cambridge, and that's where I studied computer science. So I started with a reasonably solid foundation in how computers work, but I didn't have an interest in cybersecurity. That just emerged over time because I fell into a job. So it turns out that Cambridge is actually a really great place to be based if you work in IT and you want to work in high security, high technology companies. And so I fell into a company called Encipher at the time, and they later became part of Thales. And they were really one of the leading companies in the world for hardware security products. So here we're talking things like hardware security modules, which are used by banks and governments and large companies around the world to keep their cryptographic secrets nice and safe. So my early exposure to crypto was through this role, but I was really fortunate to start in consultancy, which is a great place to be. I didn't realize it, but it turns out that it gives you this exposure to every aspect of project life cycles, from writing code to selling to customers to supporting things after they've been implemented. And that gave me a lot of exposure to different security problems being faced by companies around the world. And so I fell in love with cybersecurity, and I stayed with it for pretty much the whole time I've been working. One notable moment was when I actually returned to Thales a number of years after I first moved on from there. And I led their research team that was looking at emerging security threats. And this was about 6 years or so ago. And that was when I began to be aware that quantum was a thing. So one of the emerging threats that we were considering was quantum. This is back when blockchain was super popular as well. So we were looking at how can we use blockchains everywhere, but also what would it look like to be in a world where quantum computers reign. And so I actually left quantum then for a while, and I went off to do some stuff in the world of IoT. But just by complete chance, a couple of years ago, an opportunity emerged to leap fully into the quantum game and join a company that at the time was known as Cambridge Quantum, and was one of the leading quantum software companies in the world. And I joined that to lead this cyber group, and we had technology that we'll come back to in due course. And my role there really was to bring that technology to market. I have a fantastic team at the company, and we all worked together over the first year I was there really to bring this to market. Last year, the adventure got even bigger because Cambridge Quantum actually merged together with part of Honeywell. So there was a business unit of Honeywell that was building quantum computers, and they were building the most powerful quantum computers that currently exist in the world. Cambridge Quantum by that point was the leading quantum software company, and when you glue together software and hardware, you end up with the full story. So I now work for a company called Quantinuum, and we're pretty much the largest quantum computing company in the world, and we have everything from the hardware through to the software. And I honestly don't know how I did it, and I wish everybody gets an opportunity to play in the quantum ecosystem. It's a great place to be, but that's how I ended up where I am today.
That's a pretty amazing story, and you mentioned the blockchain. So many people still bombard me with opportunities to invest in blockchain engagement. So it's always interesting to see kind of how the quantum world really was kind of always brought up alongside blockchain, although it really has nothing to do with it. But a lot of people, because of the way history happened, I guess, always seem to bring up blockchain alongside everything. I guess also why not quantum stuff, right? So it's always interesting to see how things turn into buzzwords. And you have a winner when you start looking at the investor pitches that have cloud native blockchain and quantum, and maybe, who knows, I don't know, Kubernetes, and maybe some AI ML sprinkled on top, right? And I know you're checking all of the buzzwords, and you have probably have a loser, not a winner, but a winner on paper, right? So anyway, wanted to kind of dig into right away into quantum, right? Because I think a lot of people don't really understand what it is. So is it really just a buzzword, the boogeyman? People are saying the world is going to end, and China is going to be able to decrypt every TLS, crypto, and your bank accounts, and everything will be revealed, and your credit card information and your PII. So what's going to happen?
So I would definitely say that quantum is not a buzzword. It's a tool, and it's a tool that is unlike anything that we've had before. And so I think there is an understandable amount of excitement about it. And I think the excitement is valid. And if we look in the years ahead at what quantum can potentially do for the world, it really is quite exciting. But starting at the beginning, so quantum is we're talking here about quantum computing specifically. There's some other areas where quantum plays a part. But if we just look at quantum computing, this is a brand new technology that computes on data in a way that is completely different from the machines that we are familiar with today. So one of the things that happens when you join the quantum industry is you start calling laptops and supercomputers and stuff classical computers in a slightly derogatory way, because they're operating in a simpler world where we have
the legacy universe.
Yeah, we have zeros, we have ones, we have transistors. We cram as many of them as we can onto a chip, and we're doing great. Okay, but ultimately, we're still only able to compute on certain types of calculations, and there are problems that are completely out of reach for us. So quantum takes its inspiration. Its roots come from the study of quantum mechanics, which is something that kicked off in the 20th century with people like Einstein and others realizing that maybe the world around us actually works a bit differently than we can see with our eyes and even with our microscopes and things. And so we discovered that underneath all of the classical physics that we mostly see around us and we understand when we throw a tennis ball to each other is something far more interesting, something called quantum mechanics. And it was theorized back in the 70s or so by Richard Feynman that if we want to really grapple with the world around us, if we want to understand how things work and simulate complicated things, well, then we're going to struggle to do that with a classical form of computation. We need something that looks a bit more like the world itself. We need something that is quantum. So quantum introduces this idea of a quantum bit. So instead of a digital bit that we're familiar with, which can just be a 0 or a 1, a quantum bit can take the value of a 0, it can take the value of a 1, but it can also take any sort of in-between value between those two extremes. So we suddenly have this ability now to represent partial values or to represent potentially multiple values at once. We then also introduced these really weird concepts like entanglement. And entanglement is this idea where you can take lots of qubits and you can link them together in such a way that they can no longer be viewed as a collection of individual qubits. They're now a thing. There's something where if you manipulate one part of it, it will have impacts on the other qubits that are involved. Even if they were at other ends of the universe, you would still see this effect happening. So it's completely non-intuitive. When you bring all these things together and you start to build computers with them, what you end up with is a method of computation that can actually solve some types of problems really, really effectively. And it's a bit of an oversimplification, but what effectively we're able to do is to massively parallelize our search for a solution to certain types of problems. And one of the weird things actually is that with a classical computer, you give it a problem to solve and it thinks about it for a bit and it spits out an answer. With a quantum computer, you give it a problem to solve and you need to run that thousands of times. And as you do that thousands of times, the correct answer will hopefully emerge far more often than the wrong answers. So it's in every sense, it's a different way of thinking about computing. Now, whether it's a buzzword or a bogeyman depends upon how you view the years ahead. So in some senses, it could be seen as a buzzword right now because people are very excited about it, but the use cases are only just emerging. And so we have to be realistic that in 18 months' time, we'll be able to do more with a quantum computer. And then 18 months after that, we'll be able to do something else. But we definitely seem to be on a positive track where major hardware providers are delivering on their roadmap. So we are heading towards that future where really exciting problems are going to be solved. And whether it's a bogeyman is probably the subject of the rest of this discussion, where, yes, one of the problems that quantum computers can solve happens to have some real ramifications for cybersecurity.
Yeah, and that's kind of my question too, right? Is when you take a look at the realm of possibilities, right? I think it's pretty abstract in the mind of most people in terms of what can you actually do. Okay, you can solve problems you cannot solve with traditional compute, but give us maybe what do you think would be a good example for most people to understand the actual problems you could solve, tangible things for people that they would actually care about those problems, I guess.
Yeah, I think the one that leaps to mind is in the field of drug discovery and medicine development. One of the challenges that exists in that world today is that, let's say you want to invent a new molecule that you think is going to positively affect some disease. You need to understand how that molecule behaves, and you need to simulate how it interacts with, the various parts of the human body. And today that's computationally intractable. We can't really do it. And so what we're forced to do is this process where we, try it on an unfortunate group of mice, and then maybe we graduate through the animal food chain until eventually some brave humans take the plunge. And then, towards the end of this, potentially 10, 15-year cycle, we might be in a position where a drug can be approved. Now, the stumbling block right at the beginning there was this idea that we can't understand how these things behave and how they interact with the body. Well, with a sufficiently powerful quantum computer, we will be able to do that. So to give you a concrete example, if you imagine, so I'm no chemist here, so I'm taking some of this on face value from my colleagues, but caffeine, okay, is seen as a relatively simple molecule. It's not very complicated. Nonetheless, even though it only contains sort of 20 or so atoms, if you wanted to represent the even just the current state of that molecule, you would need more data than there'd be about 10% of the number of atoms that we have in the Earth is the number of bits you would need to just represent what's going on inside that relatively simple structure. And that's because quantum is just so complex that when we try and simulate it in the classical world, we struggle. Conversely, we would just need a quantum computer with something like 200 qubits, and we'd be able to model that successfully. So that's maybe, I think, the most, to me, obvious use case is that medicine discovery could be vastly accelerated with quantum.
So when you think of these use cases, how much do you feel like is tied back to machine learning and AI, right? Because a lot of people would argue, well, all these problems also will be magically solved by AI or ML. So how do they? I guess do they play together in the same universe? Do you ideally want to have both in the same capability? Can you end up to some outcomes with quantum without machine learning, or what's the vision, I guess, and what's the complexity to make quantum usable? Because people seem to say right now you can't really get there because of the lack of ability to build those solutions on top of quantum computing because of how complex it is and how it is to make software on it.
Yeah, so first of all, I would say that machine learning and quantum will play together in the not too distant future. So in, let's say, a couple of years' time, 2-3 years' time, we'll be in a situation where if you have a machine learning problem to solve, you will actually be in a better position if you use, let's say, 90% classical computing to do parts of it, and maybe 10% quantum computing to solve something that's particularly resource intensive. It'll actually become more efficient to do it in a hybrid between classical and quantum. And over time, that advantage that we get from embracing quantum in machine learning will only grow. However, I would encourage people to think of these as just different tools. Like you might have a screwdriver and a hammer and various other things. You pick the right tool for the for the job. So there are going to be, well, put it another way, we're not going to be in a future where quantum computers are all that we have and they've completely superseded classical machines and laptops and supercomputers, because classical computers are perfectly good at solving some types of problems. So we'll keep using them. But quantum will come along and bring certain other challenges that we can't solve today, or perhaps it's really expensive to solve it today on a big pile of GPUs or something, and they'll bring it into the realm of possible. So I would see it as a bundle of tools, and we're not going to replace AI with quantum. We're going to augment it with quantum over time. And some problems we're just going to solve classically, and we will continue to do that forever. So quantum is just another tool in the toolbox, but it's a really powerful one.
Yeah, that's very interesting. And so when you think of qubits, right? What's the current state of the art when it comes to number of qubits that you see in the United States and the UK versus China? What volumes are we talking about of qubits, I guess?
So you actually touched on an interesting point, which is what is the right way to measure a quantum computer? And one approach, and I think probably an inadequate approach, is to count the number of qubits. And just to answer your question specifically, we're at a time now where quantum computers have anywhere from a few dozen qubits to maybe the low hundreds of qubits. But what's important now is the quality of those qubits and what you can actually do with them. So it's a little bit like how you can have a 6-liter gas guzzling car engine and discover that a 1.6-liter Formula One engine can outperform it. And it's because you're doing more with less. And so the industry at the moment is leaning on a measure known as quantum volume, which I won't explain in detail, but it's a combination of how many qubits do you have, but how many computations can you do with them, and how complicated a solution can you solve with them. So quantum volume is measured at the moment in the low thousands, and so the machines that Quantinuum have, for example, currently are leading the way there, and our quantum volume is projected to increase sort of tenfold each year. That's the path we've been on at the moment. But there's a bit of debate in the industry at the moment, and I suspect we'll have a new measure emerging soon that everybody agrees is the right way to talk about the power of quantum computers.
Yeah, that's interesting. And so when you look at the quantum volumes, are the nations more or less equal between the innovation teams, or do you feel like some nation has a lead in the quality of the stuff versus others? I guess because, like you said, the number doesn't really matter at the end of the day if it's not the same quality, I guess.
Yeah. So I mean, we have a clear view, I suppose, of what's happening in the US and Europe, and anyone who's publishing papers on this topic into the academic community, we can review what's happening there. And I think it's safe to say that with the work that we're doing at Quantinuum, and there are others at IBM and places in Europe like AQT and there's a whole bunch of acronyms out there, OQC as well. These people are all moving the state of the art forward. I don't think there is a country that is light years ahead of everybody else. The current leader is us for now. It won't necessarily stay that way, and so you can say that the US and the UK have it for now. But all around the world, countries are investing in this, and it's a technology that has attracted an unusual amount of government interest. We have policies emerging from Western governments specifically about the amount of investment that's needed in quantum and how seriously we need to take it as a technology. And it's because people recognize that if you fall behind in the quantum game, whether it's to China or to some other country, that can have a serious economic impact. So the investment levels are critical, and everybody's chasing that same prize of getting a sudden leap forward in economic output that's powered by quantum.
And maybe because you mentioned the fact that some countries publish and some maybe don't do that. Are you saying that China is not really disclosing their research as much as we do in on the Western side?
Not necessarily. I mean, there is a stream of papers coming out of China. They're prolific. So it's not that they're not publishing. It's just that I think we have to be aware that in some parts of the world, who knows if we're seeing the full picture. So we just see what people choose to show us.
I can tell you we don't. That's for sure.
Well, yeah. So I think that's the question mark people have, I think.
Yeah, that makes
sense. It goes both ways. I'm sure. Oh yeah. In Western countries, there's stuff not getting published.
We have classified stuff too.
Exactly.
No doubt. All right. So I think you did an awesome job at finally explaining to most people what this is about, because I think most people like me had no real understanding of it outside of the buzzword. So we know now what you can do with it. We now understand a little bit about the concepts behind it. But when you look at the challenges, what are the challenges that quantum is going to present now and maybe even in the future?
So for cybersecurity specifically, quantum is going to give us a real headache over the next 10 plus years. So I mentioned earlier that quantum computers are really good at solving some types of problems. And unfortunately, a lot of the encryption schemes that we use today, they are secure today because classical computers can't solve some types of problems. So to give you a concrete example, I'm sure most of your audience will have heard of the algorithm RSA. It's a very popular choice that we've been using for decades to secure the internet, amongst other things. And RSA is secure. The reason why we're all happy to use it is because underneath there are some mathematical problems that are easy to solve in one direction, but we think impossible to solve in the other direction. So for RSA specifically, the problem is, if you take two very large numbers and you multiply them together, you get another very large number. And that operation is really easy to do mathematically. But if I give you the really big result and ask you to tell me what are the two numbers that produced it, that's actually bizarrely difficult. That's not something that we can solve very efficiently. And the way that we use RSA today, a supercomputer would need thousands of years to answer that question. And it would need to answer that question if it wanted to break into this communication and see what was being shared. So RSA is secure today. The problem is, back in 1994, a mathematician called Peter Shor, well ahead of his time, realized that actually we can do a lot more with quantum computers than simply simulate nature. We can actually use it to solve problems. And unfortunately for all of us in this industry, the problem he realized we could solve is effectively the RSA problem, the idea of taking a big number and figuring out which two numbers multiplied together to make it. So he figured out basically how to reverse engineer RSA. Now, this was back in 1994. We didn't have any quantum computers back then. The ones that we have today are nowhere near capable of actually executing that. So we're not in an apocalyptic moment right now. But looking ahead over, let's say, the next 10 years, maybe it will be 15 years, we'll be in a position where quantum computers can break that problem. And in doing so, then they break a lot of the internet, a lot of our secure communications, our digital signatures, all the stuff that we rely upon will be shattered by quantum computers. So that's sort of really what's motivating a lot of activity at the moment, looking into how can we avoid that problem.
Yeah, that's a pretty scary example you've given us. Obviously, the real-time encryption, I mean, one might say, the data we have now in 15 years, no one will care. But the fact is, even the stuff we store for backups and even, any kind of secure data, crypto would be compromised. And so that would require overnight pretty much to either swap to a different algorithm. And that's where I guess, and we'll talk about that in the next few questions, what we call the quantum proof algorithm. So I guess we'll have a chance to talk about that. But effectively, what you're saying is all the traditional, well, most at least of the traditional crypto we use, effectively would be something that could be cracked by the power of the quantum compute of the next, 15 years?
Yeah, so specifically, it's not all encryption that will be broken. You can split encryption into two camps. There's the sort of encryption that we use for backup tapes, for encrypting large amounts of data. That's known as symmetric encryption. So that would be algorithms. People will have heard of things like AES. That's an example of a symmetric, bulk encryption algorithm. Those are actually not really affected by quantum. There's a slight weakening, but it won't affect our use of those algorithms significantly. It's the other side, the asymmetric algorithms, and these are the ones that we use for things like digital
PKI
signatures or PKI or exchanging and agreeing keys between people. So if you were to start a secure communication between you and me, we would start off by using asymmetric cryptography, and then we would agree a symmetric key to use. It's that first stage that's vulnerable today. And I think you made a good point earlier, which is that the threat is not just going to materialize in 10 or 15 years' time. There is a risk that today adversaries are recording those sorts of exchanges, because this works retrospectively. So if somebody were to record, a highly confidential exchange today, in 10 years' time, for example, they'll be able to break into that and see what was happening in that conversation. And some stuff is useless in 10 years' time, but some stuff, and that could include state secrets or intellectual property descriptions or personal health data, that stuff is valuable for a very long time. So that's why the risk is more than just something in the distance. It's something we are actively having to think about now.
That makes a lot of sense. So I guess that's where I was confused. I guess you're saying the AES symmetric stuff will be a little bit impacted, but not enough to effectively create a real issue. So that solve all the long term storage backups, stuff like that. The PKI stuff, the asymmetric stuff, handshakes, all all that stuff would be a problem. So
Yeah,
that helps. I think people understand kind of the breadth of the issue. So
sorry, maybe I can
yeah,
highlight one more thing, because I think there's another area that is particularly relevant here, and that's the field of IoT, or anywhere that you're deploying technology that needs to remain secure for 10 or 15 years. You've got the same problem there. If you're putting devices out into the field, they ultimately, burnt into the silicon of those devices are cryptographic keys. And if those keys are vulnerable to a quantum computer, then in 10 or 15 years, those devices can be attacked. And so in, again, areas like critical national infrastructure, or perhaps even things that we fling up into space that we expect to last for 20 or so years, that's another area where action is required sooner rather than later.
that makes a lot of sense. Got it. So I think we understand. So that was very helpful. So now I guess NIST has released this list of quantum proof, algorithm. But one was breached within hours of the release of the NIST work, and I think it was breached with a very common uh, device. I don't think it required any kind of fancy work. So tell us a little bit about first what NIST is trying to achieve, uh, why they, I would argue, failed at achieving what they were aiming to do. But that's me talking, not putting words in your mouth. But I'll say that myself. And then what can we do to make sure that we're not making that mistake again?
So what NIST is trying to do, they started a process back in 2016, which was asking the question, okay, we know our existing algorithms are based on problems that quantum computers can solve. So we're going to have to move to new algorithms that are based on problems that not only can't classical computers solve, but quantum computers can't solve either. So there is there are problems that look like that quantum won't provide any particular advantage. And so the hunt was on basically to find the right shaped problems to build algorithms around. So NIST created this process, and academics around the world had to think about it, and they submitted candidate algorithms. And we've spent the last 6 years whittling down those candidates. So we started with something like 70 odd candidate algorithms. This is important to academics. The idea that you could be the person who came up with the next AES is super exciting. So people, put a lot of thought into it. And what's happened since then is that they've been subjected to scrutiny. So other academics have been tearing holes in them, looking for, ways to break these algorithms. And so they've been slowly whittled down. And earlier this year, NIST announced the first 4 algorithms that they feel comfortable are robust and will go forward to standardization. So in about 18 months or so, we'll have official standards describing 4 post-quantum algorithms. Now, what you're referring to is there's actually been 2 this year, 2 examples where attacks have been found on some of these algorithms. Not the 4 that were chosen, but some of the surrounding candidates that we're still thinking could play a role in the future. The most dramatic one was the attack against the Psych algorithm, which had just been selected by NIST to go into another round of evaluation. So they didn't back that horse, but they said, it could be a good one. Let's explore it more carefully. And an academic figured out a way to break that algorithm that required a few hours on a relatively normal laptop, which is horrifying. But this is always possible. These algorithms that we rely upon are secure only until somebody breaks them, and they become, we start to trust them when the years have passed and still nobody's figured out how to do it yet. That every algorithm has a known attack. It's just that attack is not really feasible to do. It takes 1,000 years or something. Well, somebody figured out how to massively accelerate the attacks on this Psych algorithm so that it could be done in a weekend on a laptop, which is horrifying. So naturally, that algorithm is now out of the running. And what we just have to be aware of is that wherever we place our trust on these assumptions about complexity and the idea that nobody can solve a mathematical problem, we're always vulnerable to a bright idea overnight that could break things. And later on, when we talk about how quantum can be a positive force for cybersecurity, it's actually going to be in areas where we can avoid those assumptions and instead say that breaking this part of a cyber system doesn't require you to solve a math problem. It requires you to violate the laws of physics, and that's therefore a much stronger promise.
That's so interesting. So you just really gave us a very good deep dive on what that work has been about and why sometimes people end up picking things and find out things that they were not expecting, despite the fact it's been happening for years. And I think that last NIST selection was a good example of that. And the minute you start shining a light or a fresh set of eyes on things, you end up finding potential new issues. I guess my fear is, well, clearly we demonstrated that what we call quantum proof doesn't mean it's proof of everything else. And so then how do we end up picking the right algorithm to focus on if we're going to solve this problem, if we keep finding new things, and just like quantum might allow us to find new ways to break into things, maybe other innovations will also let us do that. So are we just playing a game of never ending continuous innovation on the algorithm side?
To some extent, yeah. I mean, you can't prove a negative, and so these algorithms are always scrutinized. I mean, it's such a feather in your cap if you're the person who breaks an algorithm. So people are trying to do this stuff all the time. The longer that passes when somebody hasn't been successful, then the more confidence we have. And I should mention that some of these problems that we're building these new algorithms around, they weren't invented in 2016 when this process started. Some of these concepts go back decades. So we have some confidence in these things. But yeah, you're right. We never know when somebody's going to come up with a new quantum algorithm or a new classical algorithm that just tears through something. So it's one of the reasons why we also have to make sure that we become crypto agile. That's another buzzword that's around at the moment. And this is the idea of making sure that we're not building software and hardware that is really tightly coupled to one particular choice of algorithm, because we're in a world where algorithms are going to have to change. So we have to build systems that are flexible. And that will be a really important thing that happens over the next decade. As we move to these new algorithms, let's take the opportunity to build better, and to build crypto agile systems, to embrace quantum as a tool as well. Let's make the foundations of our systems stronger as a result of this work we're about to do.
And that's a good point, right? But at the same time, you mentioned IoT and the fact that those devices are very limited, and both the update cycle of these devices are usually not designed to be agile, and so you're gonna have the competing of agility, security, stability, and from what I've seen in IoT and edge use cases, it's pretty difficult.
Yeah.
So
But this
I
is
get it. So
this is something that is known, though, right, to NIST. NIST, the really smart folks there, they know what they're doing, and they recognize that they've got to pick algorithms that work in the real world. So they need algorithms that can be implemented on constrained devices as well as on major servers and things. So I think that is being factored in. But there's always going to be new use cases emerging, new attacks emerging, and this field will never stand still. That's for sure.
yeah, that makes a lot of sense. So now that we kind of understood a little bit about what's going on with NIST and the algorithm, I guess we talked about the pre slash current quantum world. But once we really embrace quantum and it's part of life and we have capabilities to build software on it, what are the cyber risks in the post quantum world?
Yeah, it's an interesting question. To some extent, there will be, on the one hand, there'll be no change. So we're fixing a foundational level. So cybersecurity, as you know very well, is this complicated, multi-layered, defense in depth industry, right? There's no silver bullets around. And so in this post-quantum world, it sounds really dramatic and exciting, but actually this foundational layer that most people don't see will switch from one type of maths to another type of maths, and largely life will continue. There's a hell of a lot of work required to make that transition, but a little bit like Y2K and the fear that planes would crash out the sky on the 1st of January 2000. As long as we do that right, nothing changes. But in a future world with quantum as a tool, it will be a tool for the good guys and the bad guys. And the bad guys are going to find ways that we haven't even thought of, I think, to use quantum to do bad things. They can use it to accelerate machine learning, as we talked about, which in turn can be used to perform certain types of adaptive attacks on cyber systems. Maybe they'll develop horrible, chemicals that we wish they didn't, but everybody's now got access to this capability. I think an area that maybe is not thought about enough, and this slightly segues to what we'll talk about soon, is quantum computers are going to be very good at identifying patterns in data. So anywhere that we assume that we have something that is unpredictable and random, and the obvious use case for that is a cryptographic key, if it's not actually truly random and there is any sort of pattern in there at all, quantum will be a very useful tool for somebody to tackle that problem with. So there's a number of different ways I think that cyber will be impacted by Quantinuum, even once we've fixed the cryptographic layer at the foundation.
Yeah, that's interesting. Of course, we never know what bad actors are going to come up with, and I'm sure they're going to surprise us, but we're going to probably have to do the same. So, and it's going to be another new game of multifaceted defense and offense mechanisms, and that's where I guess my fear, right, is, a lot of people are talking about quantum in the government in the U.S. here. I don't know so much about Europe, but at least here, I hear it mentioned a little bit. I think the biggest engagement has been the NIST engagement, but I've not seen a lot of urgency when it comes to DoD. That's for sure. I can tell you, I don't think anyone is paying much attention to updating algorithm or anything like that. Obviously, they're relying on this to tell people which one to use. So if we pick up new ones and then they end up getting breached for other reasons, that's going to be a problem. Because people are going to lose trust pretty quick. Particularly, my fear, right, is if what happened with NIST recently happens again, right, then you're telling people, well, we're working on this new quantum proof algorithm for a threat that doesn't already exist yet. But oh, by the way, we're recommending algorithm that actually can be cracked without quantum. So then what? Then no, you're really losing people and their trust. So what would you tell people when it comes to when to start, engaging and swapping, crypto algorithm, I guess?
So I would say that first of all, I would say this is an argument for the crypto agile approach. So NIST is aware that we don't want to put all our eggs in one basket, particularly with these new algorithms. We don't know for sure what's going to happen with them. That's why they already started by standardizing 4, and they plan to standardize more of them as well. So the idea is that we have an ecosystem that's not entirely dependent on one problem. So if something does get breached, it doesn't impact everybody. And if we've built crypto agile systems, hopefully we can all react quite quickly and move to something else. So I honestly think the hard work here, sort of forget about the algorithms. That's other people are handling that for you. I'm speaking to your audience here who are probably thinking about how to tackle this problem. The real work, I think, is to understand where you are today, because this migration is going to be a huge amount of work. And so you have to prioritize. You can't move everything overnight. And so in order to choose what you move first, you have to understand, where are you vulnerable? What is your most sensitive data? Where do you transmit data in a way that somebody could record it and therefore bring you in scope for these sort of long range attacks that we talked about earlier? And I would say, based on my conversations with many companies over many years, that understanding of where you are today is patchy at best. Once you get into a large organization, there's projects appearing everywhere. People are, adding cryptography to this thing, to that thing. There's no central register usually that's keeping track of this stuff. So that's where people need to focus right now. Get ready, start planning your migration. And we've actually written an ebook that talks about this. And last time I checked, that was scrolling along the bottom of the screen here. So if people want to have a little bit more guidance about what to do next, you can check that out. And we're not selling this. We don't have a skin in that game, but we feel like people need to be educated about what steps to take next. And really, step one is planning. And as boring as that sounds, it's really important.
Yeah, and so I guess what you're saying is effectively the migration is not so much I'm going to pick an algorithm and migrate and stick to it, but more maybe starting getting used to being agile when it comes to the adoption of algorithm, and being able to swap them in a very easy, simple way. And so kind of doing all the work of abstraction and kind of dealing with the client server, or whatever the system is about, and kind of building the flexibility to swap crypto. Is that kind of where the world is going to have to go, instead of just swapping bits?
Ideally, yes. And this is a question that you can ask for your vendors as well, because the way I've been answering this question so far, it assumes that you're maybe a large enough company that you've written a bunch of software yourself. But even large companies pull systems together from multiple vendors. So these sorts of questions are questions to ask your vendors as well. How will you react? Well, first of all, what is your quantum safe plan? And I imagine a warring proportion of them won't give you a great answer to that. But secondly, how are you going to react when these algorithms are broken? That's something I would encourage you to ask yourselves and ask your vendors, and really try and encourage the shift towards being more crypto agile. What I fear is that we'll be lazy as a collective group, and we'll do the bare minimum, which is to not introduce that agility and just to kind of move from hard coding the word RSA to hard coding the word dilithium. But I really hope that cyber practitioners take this opportunity to build something stronger and more flexible.
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense. So I guess it's kind of tough, right? Because I always tell people, well, you have to be proactive and you want to, don't put your hand in the sand and start taking action now. But no, I kind of feel like, well, we don't really know what to do. I mean, you can start building abstraction if you want. Okay, well, I'm going to build abstraction. How are we doing? Are we proactive enough? Do you feel like we need to start rebuilding that agility around algorithm now? And are we already too late compared to where we need to be?
I would say there's probably not enough activity happening yet. I actually think the US government has done a great job in that they have really tried to motivate their agencies through the national security memos and through the advisories that come out to get moving with this. But I'm not sure in the private sector enough is happening. I really sympathize for CISOs. I meet lots of them at conferences and in conversations. They've got so many fires burning all the time, right? They don't have time to, well, they sometimes don't have time to sit back and look at the strategic threats that are impending. And I read somewhere that the average tenure for a CISO is really short, it's a couple of years. So I imagine for a lot of people there is a strong motivation to see quantum as tomorrow's problem, and as a result, I think it's not getting the attention it needs. It requires a lot of resources to do this planning that I was talking about. It's dull, it's boring, it's not the sexy stuff like rolling out behavioral analytics or something like that. It's just hard work. So I think it's probably not being taken seriously enough yet. And we'll only see for sure the impact of that in 10 or 15 years, where maybe some really exciting information leaks out and we assume that that has come through these sorts of quantum attacks that we're talking about.
It's interesting because there are so many fires that are already on fire, and so you're talking about something that's not ready yet lit, and so people will always justify that as a reason not to take action now. At the same time, they will also use kind of what happened with NIST as a good reason to say, oh, it's too early, it's not ready yet, we don't know what to do, we don't want to start investing in the wrong stuff, let's just wait a little bit. What do you tell to those people? Are you telling people to start the abstraction work? What really should people be doing now, when NIST is still, I feel like, struggling trying to figure this out?
I mean, now is a great time for experimentation and getting to learn these new algorithms. So these 4 that have been selected are going to be the ones that are standardized. So there's no great mystery about what's going to happen in 2 years' time. And so I think particularly large companies or vendors of products need to start experimenting, need to start doing prototypes and proofs of concept where they use these algorithms and see what effect does it have. If you're a provider of services to other people, they're going to expect you to solve this, and they're going to expect you to solve it in a reasonable time frame. When these standards go live in 2024, people are going to be knocking on the door of any kind of vendor saying, great, do you support it? And if your answer is, oh, kind of maybe not quite yet, it's not going to reflect well on you. So I would say there is stuff to be done. On the post-quantum side, you can go out and explore the algorithms. And we'll get on to, I guess, some of the benefits quantum can deliver. And some of those are ready today. They're commercially ready. And so those are the technologies that you can start exploring as well. You can start to generate keys with quantum. And so you can have a system that's strengthened with quantum today, and then you can have a test system that's exploring the new algorithms as well. And there is definitely stuff to be doing. If you do nothing right now, I think that's a potentially negligent security choice.
And so effectively, you're saying people could stop playing with algorithm to see how they behave, and but what do you tell people when they're like, well, what if I pick one and I do all this work, but the algorithm doesn't stick, and I have to swap to another one? How is that going to help me start testing now? And why would I start testing now when really there is no threat yet of a quantum computer capable of doing what we're talking about here?
Well, firstly, I would say you can't win them all, right? So some people you have a conversation with, and they've got their head in the sand, and they've got a particularly big fire over here, and fair enough, right? But usually when you talk to people, you say, look, or how I approach it is I would say, well, crypto agility is the new watchword. So if you say to me, oh, I don't want to back the wrong horse, then you're thinking about it wrong. Build a system where you can change the horses, and then pick a few. There's only 4 at the moment to play with. Play with those 4. See if they all work. If only one of them works, explore this stuff. And if somebody tells me that the threat's not relevant for them right now, I'll possibly believe them, right? There is a particular scenario in which you're at risk today. If you share really sensitive data that has a long lifespan and you exchange it across the internet or open networks, or you're building IoT devices, you're in scope. If you're, I can imagine somebody describing a scenario to me where I think to myself, you know what, you're fine. Just make sure you've migrated everything before the next 10 years or so. So people need to evaluate their own risk and then make a decision. Not everybody has to act now, but everybody has to evaluate whether they should act.
Yeah, that makes total sense. So I guess we've been talking about the negative aspect of quantum, right? But it's not just bad news, right? It can also bring some good things to nations. So what are some of the things? I mean, you gave us a few examples, but how do we also get people reassured that quantum is not just going to be another problem, right?
Yeah, well, this is now my favorite part of the interview, right? Because this is the stuff that my team thinks about all day. So I honestly think in 10 or 20 years' time, we'll look back at this intersection of quantum and cybersecurity, and we'll see it as a positive thing, because we'll get this algorithm migration out the way and we'll forget about it like we forgot about Y2K. But what will be left in its place are tools that we can use in cybersecurity that are stronger than we've had before, thanks to quantum. So I think quantum is overall a gift to cybersecurity. That's how I would perceive it. Now, there are, at the moment, there are a number of different ways quantum will benefit cybersecurity. The 2 that get the most airtime at the moment are all related to cryptography. And they're all related to situations where we can move away from these complexity assumptions that we were talking about earlier. So the idea that this thing is safe because we haven't figured out a way to crack the maths problem yet, to a situation where some bits of our systems we can say, well, you know what? You can't violate the security properties on this bit without violating our understanding of quantum mechanics and the way the universe works. Now, we may have got quantum mechanics wrong, but it's been, key parts of it have been experimentally proven time and time again. So we're pretty confident that it's close to correct. And so somebody, so 2 examples would be the idea of sharing keys between people in a way that you can be sure nobody has listened into that exchange. So we can talk about that in a minute. This is the idea of something called quantum key distribution. And then there is another area that relates to the generation of keys themselves. So we all rely on cybersecurity, we all rely on cryptography under the covers, but how do we actually generate keys that are strong in the face of advancing threats? And the answer is quantum. Quantum is a way that we can solve that problem once and for all. So it's about this shift from maths problems to the way the universe works. I will say, however, that this is an area that is rife with hype, and some people make over exaggerations about what is possible with quantum. I think it's really important that we take a measured perspective on it. It's not a silver bullet. It can't just completely make something secure. That's not, anybody in the industry knows nothing is secure, but we can take risks off the table. And then if we do a defense in depth approach, with quantum being part of that story, we end up stronger than we were before.
That makes a lot of sense. So, see, I mean, for people that are a little bit too scared about what's going on, I think there's always a lot of pros. Of course, it's going to disrupt a little bit, but can you remind us of any massive, innovative technology that did not disrupt everything else we already were doing before? So, I guess back to what you guys are working on, right? Tell us a little bit about what is a quantum key distribution, and why would people want to use it?
So quantum key distribution, which I should mention is something that my team is exploring at a research perspective, but we've actually backed the other horse, which is key generation, and we'll talk about that in a minute. And one of the reasons why we've backed that approach today is because it's doable today. Whereas quantum key distribution, although it's addressing a really important challenge, there are some technical hurdles that mean it's not really ready for prime time yet. The quantum key distribution, it's solving the problem where, let's say you and I want to have a secure communication with each other. So the first thing we need to do is to agree an encryption key between us. And this is what we would typically today use something like RSA for, to help, or there's protocols like Diffie-Hellman and others that we can use to agree a key between us. And once we've done that, great. I can encrypt something, you can decrypt it, and we're good. The question becomes then, how can we secure that key exchange, that agreement of a key, as best as we possibly can? And today, the state of the art that most people are using is to use asymmetric cryptography. But what is emerging now is this idea that maybe we can improve something here. Maybe we can actually use the weird properties of quantum to agree a key between us and have complete confidence that nobody has seen that key that we agreed. And the way this would look today is that perhaps you and I are at one end of a fiber optic cable from each other. And we can therefore send photons to each other, photons of light. And photons happen to be something that you can make a qubit out of. Qubits are funny things. You can make them out of lots of different things in the real world. And photons are one of the things you can make a qubit out of. And I won't go into all the gory details of exactly how quantum key distribution works, but nonetheless, if you and I were at the end of a cable of each other, we could share data between us. And we can prove using the properties of quantum that nobody has read that data as it went from me to you. And that's because in the world of quantum, when you read data, you fundamentally change it. And you change it in a way that can be detected if you're clever about it. So quantum key distribution is about sharing information from A to B and proving to yourselves that nobody else intercepted that. And that's a really useful building block for cybersecurity. The challenge that we have is that at the moment, you need to be at two ends of a fiber optic cable from each other. Or you need to have a satellite flying overhead that you're going to bounce signals off and back down again to somebody else. So it's not particularly practical today. And there are various challenges that need to be solved over the next 5 to 10 years in order to make this a technology that we're all using all the time for our communications.
That's a pretty amazing, game-changing way of rethinking a well understood problem. And it opens the door to a lot of other use cases. I guess I've never even thought about it. It's not, I guess, very practical right now, but it doesn't mean it's not something you can solve. So I guess your team has been working on this, and do you feel like this is something that's in the realm of possibilities in what time frame?
So quantum key distribution, there are pilots, today. People are using it on a small scale. I think we will still need maybe another 5+ years before we're at a state where this is universally and widely used as a technology. At the moment, it's limited to, I would say, experiments. You have to be either end of one of these cables from each other. So it might be a great way for two data centers that are reasonably close to each other to share data, for example. But it's not, I would say, practical yet. So there are companies out there selling solutions. You can buy a QKD box, but it's the infrastructure that we need that will allow us to then connect up from the UK to the US, for example, which just isn't really feasible today.
Yeah. Wow, interesting. So I guess, how do you use quantum to generate crypto keys? Is that in the same construct, or it would be a different, or there are other options to get to the same outcome, I guess?
Yeah, so this is solving a very related problem, but it is a different problem. And this is the area that my team has really focused on for the last few years. So the problem we're solving here is that when we do encryption, we need cryptographic keys that are unpredictable. And the question of how do you actually make sure those keys are strong? How do you make sure they've been generated properly and not something's gone wrong and these keys have a bit of a pattern to them, or they could be all zeros or something? How do you actually know that your keys are unpredictable? It's a really difficult problem to solve. And in fact, mathematically, you can't solve it using sort of the approaches that we've used so far, the classical approaches. They fundamentally can't crack that problem. Now, quantum, it provides us with a different approach to this, because quantum fundamentally is random at its heart. So the classical world around us, if you spin a coin or if you throw a tennis ball, everything that's happening there is, obeying Newtonian physics, the kind of simple classical physics that we're all familiar with and learned at school. And there's nothing random there. It's all kind of playing out. We're in this state now, and then we're going to be in that state in a minute, and in that state in a minute. And that's not really a recipe for creating encryption keys. Quantum, however, is fundamentally random. It's one of the properties of quantum. So if you prepare a qubit in a certain way and you measure it, you honestly have no idea whether you're going to get a 0 or a 1. And no amount of computing power that you throw at that problem will ever answer it. It's just a property of the universe. You don't know the answer to that. And so this is a really exciting ingredient, because that finally answers the problem. How do we actually create something unpredictable? Well, you measure something unpredictable, you measure something quantum, and you can turn that into a cryptographic key. And so that's exactly what my group has been working on. When I said I joined a couple of years ago and brought a product to market, that product is in production today, generating cryptographic keys powered by our quantum computer. And those are the strongest cryptographic keys in the world. They're the only keys that you can mathematically prove are unpredictable. So that is a good example of how quantum can impact us now. A lot of people say quantum's this thing that only delivers value in 5 years or 10 years time, but those people are out by 5 or 10 years, because as of December last year, there are commercial products in the world that use quantum computers to do something meaningful. And I'm sure we're going to have even more use cases emerging in the years ahead. These two, this key generation and the key distribution, these are just what we're thinking about right now. But I think there'll be things like quantum money coming up, where we can rely on the idea that quantum data can't be copied. Well, that's great. You can use that then to represent money, so that we can't both pretend to have the same piece of money. So there's all these different use cases emerging, and it's going to be a rich field. But today, if you want to embrace this technology, the answer is that it can be used for key generation.
Very interesting. Very interesting. So I guess what am I not asking when it comes to crypto keys specifically, or do you feel like we gave the audience a good rundown? A lot of people were asking again, if AES is quantum safe. I think you said yes, but or at least safe enough, right? I don't know. You said there was maybe a piece or something degraded,
Yeah.
or I don't know. Yeah.
So there is an algorithm called Grover's algorithm, which is kind of the equivalent of Shor's algorithm, but for attacking symmetric keys like AES. Fortunately, that algorithm is not particularly effective. It makes a slight improvement, but not much. And so if we double the length of our AES keys, for example, we will be safe. And so that will be the advice that emerges over time, that we just make our keys a bit longer, and then we can keep using those algorithms.
That makes sense. So I guess we talked a lot about crypto and algorithm, but where else do you think quantum is going to impact the world?
So I think there's quite a few areas. We talked about one of them earlier in the conversation, which is this idea of drug discovery. And more broadly, this is the idea of using quantum to help us discover new materials full stop. So they might be medicines, but they could equally be materials for other use cases. So for example, we're already doing work with major energy companies to explore what materials could be used for carbon capture and carbon sequestration. And this is about, can we simulate how materials behave using quantum technology? And as these machines become more and more powerful, we'll be able to simulate more and more complicated things. And we'll reach a tipping point where we'll be able to simulate things that we can't simulate classically. And that's where we're in this, quantum advantage area, where we are definitely better to be using quantum than not. Another area that's interesting is language processing. This one's really crazy, but this is the idea that we can use quantum computers to fundamentally understand human language. And we have a team working on this at the moment. They're based in Oxford in the UK, led by a guy called Bob Cook, who is really the leading expert in this area. And they have a way of representing human written language as quantum circuits. And there's this plan afoot that we'll see perhaps in 5 to 10 years' time, that we can use quantum computers to understand what language really means. We're in a world today where systems like GPT-3 and others can make it look a lot like a computer can write English or understand it. But really, we're still in this world of very advanced pattern recognition. We're not really concluding anything about what a statement means. And yet with quantum computers, we expect to revolutionize this area completely. And this would have massive ramifications from everything from our friendly devices around us. I won't say a name in case somebody's device answers back in a minute. But if you think about the intelligence community, where they have so much data to plow through, and wouldn't they love to understand what is the intent behind a message that somebody's just sent to somebody else? So these are just some of the ideas that we're exploring right now. Machine learning as well, we mentioned that as an area. I'm honestly just excited because I think we're just scratching the surface. I don't think we know yet everything that will be possible. We've got quantum information scientists, we've got people emerging from universities today who will discover what these use cases are going to be in the future. So I think there's all sorts of possibilities lying ahead of us. But the ones that we know about are really exciting.
Yeah, no doubt. Pretty exciting. So, you know me, I wouldn't do my job if I didn't ask you the most important question of all. How are we, the United States, and maybe I guess the UK, since you know probably a lot more about what's going on in the UK, doing versus China in quantum's adoption?
Yeah, so China is far from ignoring quantum. In the cyber area, they have really invested in quantum key distribution. So the first of these two technologies we talked about. And I would say they're leading the way in terms of the experiments they've conducted and what they've been able to demonstrate in that area. So they are investing hard in this as a subject, and probably on the quantum key distribution front, they are potentially leading the way. It's very hard, as we discussed, to know for sure the state everybody is in, and we have to rely upon what gets published in papers and to take those papers on face value. On computing, equally, China is investing hard, and we saw a little bit earlier this year that the announcement of a Chinese quantum computer from Baidu that was announced to the world. We don't have such a clear view on the power of that versus other devices that we're aware of. I suspect the West is a little bit ahead on that front, but it is going to be an arms race, and they are investing heavily. They have the academic institutions necessary to pump out the graduates that we need, the PhDs that are needed to shape this industry. So I think China needs to be taken seriously as a quantum player, and I think the answer to that is continued investment in quantum technology, in the use of it, in us becoming familiar with it in Western countries. And from a cyber perspective, it's another reason to get on with adopting quantum technology and adopting quantum safe algorithms, because I guess one never quite knows where the adversary is when it comes to developing a machine. I don't for a second believe that they have a quantum computer today that will break encryption systems, but nor do I imagine they're going to announce it when they reach that milestone either. So we have to be vigilant, and we have to invest hard now.
Yeah, that's a very critical piece of investment for the nations. And so when you look at the UK versus the US, do you see a lot of collaborations going on between the nations, or you find the scientists to work in vacuums?
No, absolutely. There's a lot of collaboration in the quantum space. In fact, it's one of the things I really enjoy about working here is that in this sector is that it's so new and early and exciting that everybody's collaborating with everybody, and it's actually really a cooperative place to be in. That being said, I mean, every country has to think about its sovereignty, its own concerns. I recall Angela Merkel, back when she was the German chancellor, she referenced quantum as something that would be existential to Germany's economy. It's something they have to invest in to get right, and they have done so. So I think we're seeing a combination of academic collaboration across countries, but definitely some siloed investment in specifically so that countries can develop their own intellectual property and their own capabilities, because quantum is going to be a world-shaping tool, and everybody wants to make sure that they are at the forefront of that.
I'm talking to myself. I was muted. Sorry. So I mute myself to make sure there's no echo. So we're gonna take questions now from the public, and so there's a lot of questions. And by the way, for people, make sure you start with a Q to make sure we know it's a question. We have too many comments on the chat to keep track otherwise. So start posting your comments now. Now, when it comes to learning and self growth, some people were asking about books. I don't know if you have any books you could recommend to the audience, but at the very least, and you kind of mentioned it at the beginning, but what skills would you say someone that are interested in getting engaged in the quantum universe of things? What do you think we need to learn?
Yes, it's a really good question, and one that I feel like I can speak to, because 2 years ago I didn't really know anything about quantum, and I'm not an expert by any means now, but I've been through a bit of a learning curve myself. So firstly, quantum is a big space. Quantum cybersecurity is still quite a big space. So there's not one specific skill set you need. If I look at my group and the people that I work with in Quantinuum, we do have folks with PhDs in quantum information. This is, we need those people because they have the expertise to develop, the theory that underpins all the stuff we do. So depending on where you are in your educational journey, I think quantum is going to be a hugely valuable skill set to have. Every time I'm at a conference, the inevitable topic comes up of skills shortages. So if you think cyber has a skill shortage problem, you should check out quantum cyber or even quantum in general. There's only so many PhDs emerging at the moment, and they're being snapped up by the major companies. So if you're still in the educational phase, you could definitely consider exploring the gory details. But in my team, I have people with classical cryptography skill sets. We need those people to keep us honest, because sometimes you can get a bit swept up in all the excitement of what quantum can do, and you need somebody with a critical classical mindset that says, that's all well and good, but how do you plug that into the real world? And so we've built a team that's balanced in that sense, so that we don't get swept up with the hype. We can build something that's pragmatic and sensible. And then we've got people who are simply software engineers who are building out the services behind this. So there's all these different roles that exist in the quantum cyberspace, and you should definitely explore it if you're interested. What I found helpful when I was trying to learn this space is I'll recommend one resource because I thought it was amazing. Carnegie Mellon University on YouTube, they have a sequence of 20 plus lectures on quantum computing. And I thought that was really, really valuable. So if you search up on YouTube, Carnegie Mellon Quantum, something like that, you'll find it. Now, I will say the camera work is bizarrely terrible. I don't quite know what was going on. They were trying some sort of automated lecture recording, but the lecturer is incredible. And if you do nothing else, watch the first episode, because it doesn't get into very much maths, and it will blow your mind about quantum in general. But if you can, stick with it for 10 or 12 episodes, and you'll learn enough to be dangerous. And then that's what you can take to your interview and go get a job in this awesome industry.
Is this the one that there's a cat on it, or maybe it's I don't know if I'm the right place.
That's right. Yeah. I think the thumbnail is a picture of a cat. Yeah. That's
okay, right. I'm gonna post it on the chat so people can. I just found it on YouTube. It looks pretty cool. There's a cat. That's a very weird looking cat. So
yeah, I think that's a reference to Schrodinger's cat, I guess, which some people might know from Big Bang Theory or from physics.
So yeah, I put the link on the chat for people to check it out. What about books? Is there a book that you recommend for people to get started in quantum?
Yeah, there is a book, and I'm going to have to try and spot it on my bookshelf to remember the name of it. It's known colloquially as Icon Mike, so perhaps a Google search will turn that up. It's kind of the it's sort of the Bible for quantum information and quantum computing. So I read a certain amount of that when I was preparing for this role, and it just talks you through the basics of qubits and entanglement and so forth. And it gets a little bit mathematical in places, so it's not as light reading as Stephen Hawking or something like that. But if you want to get into it, that's probably the right place to start. And maybe somebody in the chat will recognize what I'm referring to and pop the name in there.
You just mentioned the name again. You mentioned it, but I think people didn't understand.
It gets called Mike and Ike. Ike and Mike, I think it is. It's a reference to the two authors. I was going to crane my head and see if I can see it on my bookshelf, but otherwise we'll have to give up on that. 1 second.
Yeah, that's a big deal. Go check it out. That's interesting. A lot of people were asking about books. I'm going to still start picking the next question while you look for the book. Here we go. All right.
Do you know where the book has been hiding? It's been supporting the microphone I'm using, so I can tell you. Let me just grab it and I can show everybody. Yeah, I chose it because it was a big, solid, meaty textbook.
Right.
With You can refer
Quantum
to.
computation and quantum information.
There we go.
Wow.
So
Okay.
that's sort of the the go-to book that many people
Book.
swear by. So if you're going to read one book, maybe try that one as a starting point.
So quantum. I'm doing a video on the top 20 books. No, I started with the top 10, but people gave me so many books. I had 75 books to pick from, and so I'm doing the top 20 books to learn. I'm gonna add it as my 18th book right there. Here we go. Perfect. Okay. Thank you for the book. So a few more questions before we let you go. I know you're busy. I know it's late too. Are you in the UK right now?
I am.
You're
Yeah,
in the
yeah.
US.
I'm in the UK,
You're
just outside Cambridge.
So a lot of people were asking kind of the same kind of question between I was posting yesterday about Elon Musk, Tesla, Dojo, GPU stuff. They are able to do some pretty amazing compute. Doing more than they even shut off the power grid of their city because of the volume of kilowatts it was consuming. When you think qubits and you think, I guess, quantum, how does this play with the innovation we see going on in GPUs and TPUs? Is it a complete different universe and there's no lessons learned and reuse of anything? Is it overlapping in some aspect in the cooling or the power? I just don't know enough about hardware to understand the overlap.
So I guess from a end result perspective, there is, they're solving very different problems. I actually don't know a great deal about Elon's. I just saw the headlines pass by. I saw the power surge reference. As far as I know, he's still operating with classical computing at that stage. So knowing Elon, he's probably doing amazing things in that industry, but it's still classical computing, so it can only attack a certain type of problem. And so in that sense, quantum computers will always be tackling different issues. And so even if Elon takes us forward an order of magnitude on the classical side, in time, quantum will still smash through that and way beyond for the types of problems that it can solve. Now, you mentioned maybe there's some overlap in the engineering, and that could very well be true. As you build any kind of powerful system, cooling becomes a big issue. And cooling is critical for quantum computers, not because they get hot and their fans start spinning, but because often to actually create a quantum computer, you need to, for some of the technologies involved, you need temperatures that are as close to possible to absolute zero to make these things even work. So in fact, a really cool fact is that the coldest places in the universe that we know of are in the quantum computers that exist on the planet, because that's where we've had to really chill things down well below the temperature of outer space to make these things possible. And I'm sure there are overlaps in the engineering challenges involved there, and maybe some of the crazy stuff Elon comes up with, but I would separate them entirely. Quantum is a different beast and going to deliver in a very different way.
So would it be easier for you guys to ship it in space with SpaceX and keep it cool up there, and so you don't have to replicate the space temperature? I mean, that sounds like a pretty interesting challenge right there. So who knows what space?
I wouldn't want to rule out anything. It's worth saying there are many different technologies that underpin quantum computers, and not all of them require freezing temperatures. Some of them may be able to operate at room temperatures. So we'll see as the years unfold what emerges as as the winning choices or the collection of technologies that we think are most effective.
Interesting. Next question we had was, I guess, and I'm not sure I understand the question, but I'm going to ask it anyways. Can you discuss the difference between quantum computers and quantum technology and support thereof on infrastructure PKI?
Yeah, I can take a stab at this. I mean, I think when we talk about quantum computers, we're usually referring to general purpose devices that can ultimately execute anything, Turing complete, that we then hope to use to solve cool problems. Whereas when you talk about cybersecurity and quantum, sometimes you're talking about special purpose devices, that they're not general computers. They are designed to tap into a particular aspect of quantum behavior. So if you have, for example, a quantum key distribution box, at two ends of a fiber cable, those aren't general purpose quantum computers. They're not going to get more and more powerful over time. They do a specific job. So I don't know if that's maybe what the question is getting at, but there is, a bit like, you can have a general purpose classical computer, or you can have an ASIC that's designed to do one thing specifically. The same is going to be true in quantum as well.
Interesting. Well, like always, I'm going to give you the chance to give your closing words for everybody. But before, I'm going to remind who is going to be next on the show. So next Tuesday, 1 p.m., October 11th, 1 p.m. Eastern, we're going to have the great team of TAK, T-A-K, which is a government team from the DoD, which has built amazing solutions on Android and technologies to support the warfighter. And they've been doing an amazing job at embracing agility. 250,000 users, users from every side of the house, including Five Eye and engagements with DHS and other agencies. So I think it's going to be a great team. We're going to have two of their members on the show live, and it's going to be a great discussion next Tuesday. So don't miss it. Also wanted to remind everybody, if you're interested in becoming one of the ambassador of the metaverse we're creating for cloud native metaverse, please reach out to us on LinkedIn so we can add you to the list. We're going to only take maybe 20 people. We already have probably 12 already. So we need another 8 people that will be kind of the moderators, the making sure there's no abuse of sexual stuff or whatever nonsense people do nowadays. So want to make sure everything is safe, and we can have a great experience for everybody, all genders and colors alike and whatnot. So if you're interested, please reach out to us. And then over to Duncan, wanted to thank you, of course, again for joining. I think it's been for me, at least, I can tell you, I've probably learned more on this one episode than I've learned in the last 5 years about quantum. So it was very helpful for me, no doubt. I hope it was the same for all those listeners. I think we had about 1,000 people on the show today, so that was great. I don't have the full number yet, but great episode, no doubt. And over to you for the last words.
Yeah, well, firstly, thank you very much for inviting me to speak with you. And I think we touched on most of the important areas that matter for quantum and cybersecurity. If I wanted to finish on one point, I'll try and finish positively. So we spent quite a bit of our conversation talking about how quantum is going to create risks and challenges for us in cybersecurity. And I hope your audience sort of noted that and are going to go do some planning and thinking. But I'd like to finish on a positive note, which is that quantum broadly is going to be a wonderful, amazing thing. It's an exciting industry to be part of. And it's an industry and it's a technology that's already delivering value. And for cyber in particular, as I said earlier, quantum will be a positive thing for us. If we embrace it now, we get past this nasty migration, and we'll end up with a tool set that makes us even stronger against the people we have to do battle with every day. So think positively on quantum, go explore it. And if you want to know anything more about it, you can probably find Quantinuum online if you look closely.
Well, thanks, Duncan, again, and thanks everybody for joining this episode of In the Nick of Time. We'll see you next Tuesday, 1 p.m. Eastern. In the meantime, keep up the good fight. Let's make sure our kids have a fighting chance at winning against China 20 years from now. Thanks.